Dragons. These titanic, fire-breathing creatures have terrorized our ancestors for millennia. But wait a second, how is it possible that completely isolated civilizations, separated by entire oceans, all imagine the same creature? A giant reptile, winged, intelligent, often guarding treasures. That's pretty weird, right? In this video, we're diving into the fascinating history of dragons, from their mysterious origins to their current dominance in our favorite video games and books. And trust me, you're going to discover things you never would have imagined. Let's start at the beginning. Where do dragons come from? Well, nobody really knows for certain. But here's what's crazy. Dragons appear in almost every ancient culture around the world. In China, in Europe, in the Middle East, even in South America. Researchers recently used statistical tools to analyze dragon myths across the globe, and they discovered something incredible. It appears that the concept of the dragon was born in Africa a very, very long time ago. We're potentially talking about the Upper Paleolithic period. Then, the idea migrated with humans to Southeast Asia, then Australia, the Americas, and finally Europe. The proto-dragon, as it has been reconstructed through these analyses, was part serpent. It guarded water sources and watering holes, could fly, and appeared when rain and sun met. It had scales, horns, and even human-like hair. Yes, you heard that right, hair. Imagine that for a second. But why did humans invent dragons? There are several theories. Some think our ancestors stumbled upon dinosaur fossils and misinterpreted them. A stegosaurus skeleton, for example, with its bony plates and defensive spikes, could easily resemble a dragon to someone who's never heard of paleontology. In China, in the 4th century BC, a historian named Chang Qiu actually misidentified a fossil as that of a dragon. Other researchers propose a more fascinating explanation. Anthropologist David Jones suggests that the fear of dragons is hardwired into our brains through evolution. Think about it. Our primate ancestors had to fear large predators, giant snakes like pythons, big cats, birds of prey, crocodiles. The dragon would therefore be a combination of all these ancestral threats, a kind of imaginary super predator that concentrates all our primal fears. That's why even today's children, who have never seen a python in the wild, feel a certain apprehension towards snakes. There are also more down-to-earth explanations. Nile crocodiles, which could reach 20 feet long in ancient times, may have swum into the Mediterranean and inspired European legends. In Australia, giant monitor lizards called goannas, with their sharp teeth and formidable claws, occupy an important place in Aboriginal folklore. And get this, recent studies suggest that these lizards produce venom. Now, let's talk about cultural differences, because not all dragons are alike. In fact, there are two major dragon traditions that are radically opposed. In Europe and the Middle East, dragons are essentially forces of evil. In Egyptian mythology, the god Apophis was a great serpent representing the world of darkness. In Christian tradition, the dragon literally becomes the symbol of Satan, the beast of the apocalypse. St. George slaying the dragon became one of the most iconic images of Christianity. This story, by the way, has its roots in Egyptian mythology and traveled through the centuries to Europe via the Roman Empire. Medieval European dragons are generally described with wings, a barbed tail, and breathing fire. They're greedy, violent, and jealously guard treasures. In the Epic of Beowulf, written around the year 1000, the hero faces a dragon that sleeps on a hoard. In the Nibelungenlied, the Germanic epic written around 1200, the hero Siegfried kills a dragon guarding gold and bathes in its blood to become invincible. We find this same idea that the dragon is a formidable adversary that must be defeated to prove one's courage. But in Asia, it's a completely different story. Chinese dragons, called lung, are benevolent creatures. They represent yang, the principle of heaven, activity, and masculinity in Chinese cosmology. Far from being monsters to be slain, Asian dragons are associated with good fortune and symbolize auspicious powers. They accompany gods and demigods as personal mounts. Chinese emperors even use the dragon symbol to project their imperial strength. It's no coincidence that the dragon adorned the Chinese flag until 1911. The earliest draconic representations in China date back to the Xinglonghua culture between 6,200 and 5,400 BC. That's really ancient. And unlike their European counterparts, Asian dragons are generally wingless. They're slimmer, more aerial, more elegant. They don't breathe fire, but possess magical abilities related to natural elements, particularly water and rain. In Japan, the dragon became the Ryu, or Tatsu, capable of changing size at will, to the point of becoming becoming invisible. In Korea, dragons are depicted with long beards and sometimes carry a giant orb called yuju. Korean mythology even describes dragons as evolving from serpentine proto-dragons called imujis, which aspired to become true dragons by catching a yuju fallen from the sky. But dragons aren't just European or Asian. In Mesoamerica, the Yucatec Maya venerated Kukulkan, a serpent deity whose origins date back to the Classic period. The Aztecs worshipped Quetzalcoatl, whose name in Nahuatl means precious serpent or quetzal-feathered serpent. In the mythology of Andean civilizations in South America, the Amaroca, or Qatari, is a mythical two-headed serpent or dragon that lives underground, at the bottom of lakes and rivers. And here's where it gets really interesting for us modern geeks. Dragons never really disappeared, they just transformed. If I say Smaug, you immediately think of Tolkien's The Hobbit, this selfish and cunning dragon who has been sleeping on stolen treasure for 150 years has become the archetype of the dragon in modern fantasy. Tolkien, who translated Beowulf, drew directly from medieval myths to create his universe. Smaug possesses all the characteristics of the classic European dragon: greed, intelligence, the ability to speak, and especially that supreme arrogance that makes him so memorable. He spends his time boasting about his invincibility while desperately searching for the flaw in his armor of scales. Tolkien's work completely revolutionized how we see dragons in literature. Before him, dragons were primarily creatures of folklore. After him, they became complex characters with motivations, personalities, and sometimes even sympathy. Look at Game of Thrones. George R.R. Martin's dragons are weapons of mass destruction. Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion aren't gentle companions. They're terrifying instruments of power that can reduce entire armies to ashes. Martin himself was convinced to add dragons to his first book by writer Phyllis Eisenstein, and he even dedicated A Storm of Swords to her. The dragons of Westeros have a rich history. They were domesticated by ancient Valyria, nearly extinct after a volcanic catastrophe, then used by the Targaryen dynasty to conquer an entire continent. For centuries, they disappeared, considered extinct, until Daenerys Targaryen hatched them in a ritual of blood and fire. Martin's dragons have a particularity. They grow continuously as long as they have space and food. Balerion, the largest dragon in Westerosi history, was so huge he could swallow a mammoth whole. These creatures aren't just monsters. They represent absolute power and the ability to change the course of history. In literature, dragons have taken every imaginable form. Anne McCaffrey created The Dragon Riders of Pern in the 60s, a science fiction series where dragons were genetically modified by humans to fight a space fungus. She's the first woman to have won both a Hugo Award and a Nebula Award, and her dragons are creatures with whom humans form deep telepathic bonds. Naomi Novik wrote Temeraire, a series that reimagines the Napoleonic Wars with dragons. A British naval captain finds himself bonded to an intelligent and cultured dragon, and their relationship becomes the heart of the story. Ursula K. Le Guin created dragons in Earthsea that speak the language of creation and are practically demigods. In her books, dragons and humans even share common ancestry, and certain rare women can transform into dragons. And then there's the recent phenomenon of romantasy. Rebecca Yaros's Fourth Wing exploded on BookTok, with a heroine who forms a bond with a rebellious dragon in a deadly military academy. These stories mix romance, danger, and dragons in proportions that make readers completely addicted. Before we continue, if you enjoy this kind of content about mythology, legends, and geek culture, remember to subscribe and hit the bell to not miss anything. It really helps me keep creating this type of video. Thanks. Now, let's talk video games, because this is where dragons really became superstars of modern entertainment. Dungeons & Dragons changed everything. This tabletop role-playing game, created in 1974, literally has the word dragon in its title, and for good reason. The D&D Monster Manual contains dozens of dragon varieties, each with its own personality, powers, and moral alignment. There are good metallic dragons, like gold and silver dragons, and evil chromatic dragons, like red and black dragons. These creatures have become the standard for all modern fantasy. In D&D, dragons are ultimate adversaries. Facing an ancient dragon is the kind of challenge that defines an entire campaign. These creatures are incredibly intelligent, possess powerful magical abilities, and have treasures that inspire awe. An adult red dragon can raise an entire city with its fire breath, while discussing philosophy with adventurers brave enough to stand up to it. The success of D&D inspired countless video games. Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter Nights, Planescape Torment. All these classic RPG games draw directly from the Dungeons & Dragons universe and feature dragons as memorable encounters. But it's Skyrim that really popularized dragons among an entire generation of gamers. The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, released in 2011, puts you in the shoes of the Dovahkiin, the Dragonborn, a hero who possesses the soul of a dragon in a mortal body. Dragons in Skyrim aren't simple bosses. They're dynamic enemies that can appear anywhere in the open world. You can be peacefully picking flowers in the mountains when suddenly a scream tears through the sky and a dragon swoops down on you. These dragons are varied. There are simple brown dragons that only breathe fire or frost, up to legendary dragons that master devastating dragon shouts. Alduin, the main antagonist dragon, is literally a dragon god who wants to devour the world. What makes Skyrim special is that you can learn the language of dragons, use their shouts as weapons, and even ride certain dragons after mastering the Bend Will shout. Skyrim's dragons more closely resemble European wyverns, with only 2 hind legs and wings that serve as front legs. They're immortal, extremely intelligent, and have a natural affinity for magic. In the game's lore, they were once worshipped as gods by the ancient Nords, and entire temples were dedicated to them. Other games have explored different facets of dragons. In Dragon Age, dragons are apex predators that dominate the food chain. The game's very name comes from the fact that dragons reappeared after being considered extinct. These creatures are massive, territorial, and incredibly dangerous. In Monster Hunter, dragons are just one category among countless monsters to hunt. Rathalos, the king of the skies, became an icon of the franchise with its fire-breathing red wyvern design. The Monster Hunter series treats dragons as animals in a complex ecosystem rather than purely magical creatures. World of Warcraft introduced the dragon aspects, proto-divine dragons that protect different aspects of reality. Alexstrasza, the Lifebinder, Ysera, the Dreamer, Neltharion, who became Deathwing, the Destroyer. These dragons can take human form and have stories spanning tens of thousands of years. And then there are games like How to Train Your Dragon that completely flip the script. Instead of killing dragons, you befriend them. Toothless, the Night Fury dragon, became one of the most beloved animal companions in modern animated cinema. This approach paved the way for a new generation of stories where dragons are no longer monsters to defeat, but allies, friends, even family members. Dragon's Dogma offers dragon combat that feels truly epic. You can climb on these colossal creatures while they fly, cling to their wings, and strike them until they crash. It's visceral, it's intense, and it really captures the feeling of fighting something much larger and more powerful than you. More recent games continue to innovate. In From Software's Elden Ring, ancient dragons are quasi-divine beings whose scales are made of stone. Grail, the ancient dragon, is so massive that it can't even move anymore and simply lies there while its descendants defend it. It's a tragic and melancholic vision of what immortal creatures become after eons of existence. Even games like Palworld, recently released, include dragon-like creatures that you can capture, train, and even ride in combat. The constant evolution of dragon representation in video games shows how relevant and fascinating these creatures remain for players. What's remarkable is that despite all these variations, certain elements remain constant. Dragons are almost always creatures of immense power. They often represent supreme challenges that only the bravest heroes can face. Their intelligence distinguishes them from simple monsters. A dragon that can't speak or reason is just a big, dangerous lizard. But a dragon that can negotiate, threaten, manipulate, or philosophize, that's where the magic really happens. Dragons also often symbolize something greater. In ancient myths, they embodied the forces of nature that humanity couldn't control: storms, floods, fires. In modern fantasy, they represent absolute power and the responsibility that comes with it. Possessing a dragon in Game of Thrones means having the ability to change the world, for better or worse. There's also this aspect of the human-dragon relationship that fascinates. Whether it's Aragon and Saphira in the Inheritance Cycle, Hiccup and Toothless in How to Train Your Dragon, or the Dragonborn and Paarthurnax in Skyrim, these bonds transcend simple alliance. It's a connection that fundamentally changes both parties. The dragon brings the power and and wisdom of centuries of existence. The human brings empathy, determination, and sometimes the madness necessary to accomplish the impossible. Look at how dragons have evolved in our popular culture. In the 50s and 60s, they were still primarily villains in B-grade fantasy films. In the 90s, thanks to authors like Tolkien, whose influence finally expanded massively, they became more nuanced. The 2000s and 2010s saw the explosion of Game of Thrones and Skyrim, which placed dragons at the center of epic narratives. Today, in 2025, dragons are everywhere. In books, games, series, films, even in genres we never would have imagined, like romance. Book Talk has created an entire subgenre called Dragon Rider Romance, where the romantic plot unfolds in dragon training academies. It's wild how much this idea has captured readers' imaginations. Rebecca Yaros's Fourth Wing dominated bestseller lists for months, proving that the public's appetite for dragon stories has never been stronger. What makes dragons eternally fascinating, I think, is that they embody something fundamental in the human experience: the fear of the unknown, the desire for power, the tension between destruction and creation. A dragon can reduce a kingdom to ashes or protect it for centuries. This duality resonates with us because it reflects our own contradictions. Dragons also remind us of a time when the world was vaster and more mysterious, when maps still bore the inscription "Hic sunt dracones," here be dragons, to mark unexplored territories. In a modern world where almost every square inch of the planet has been mapped by satellite, dragons represent that part of mystery and danger we've lost. They embody pure adventure. That's perhaps why they continue to captivate our imagination generation after generation. No matter how many times we tell their story, no matter how many variations we create, dragons remain powerful symbols of everything that's greater than us. More powerful, wiser, more dangerous, more magnificent. From the dark caves of Beowulf to the celestial academies of Fourth Wing, from the mountains of Skyrim to the scorched lands of Westeros, dragons have come a long way, but they remain fundamentally the same creatures that haunted the dreams and nightmares of our ancestors thousands of years ago. So there you have it, folks, the history of dragons, from their mysterious origins in African myths to their total domination of our modern pop culture. These creatures have survived through the ages, adapting to each new culture, each new technology, each new generation of storytellers. And honestly, I don't think they'll disappear anytime soon. What fascinates you most about dragons? Is it the majestic Asian dragons or the fierce European wyverns? What's your favorite dragon in literature or video games? Let me know in the comments.